ACME would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waterways of Greater Melbourne, the people of the Kulin Nation, and recognise that ACME is located on the lands of the Wurundjeri people. We also acknowledge First Nations people as the original storytellers of this land, and recognise their significant contribution to the contemporary moving image.
Thank you so much for everyone joining today. I will share my screen and I will do my own acknowledgement because I am not in Melbourne. I am actually on the beautiful Gundungra lands. So welcome to the second session. And I am in the Blue Mountains, which at the moment is cold and rainy, and we have the cockatoos, which are screaming for attention. So I'd like to acknowledge the first educators, the Darug and Gundungra people of the Blue Mountains area. So today is session 2, where session 1 we started looking at the why and the basic how of we use digital games in our education. And today we're actually going to put some of that into practice. We're going to start thinking about how we design a lesson sequence and also talk about how we can create those resources to actually support student learning, effective learning as well. Our final session next week is a workshop where you get the opportunity to do some question or ask some questions about those finer details, particularly around technology, particularly around how to use specific types of games. And again, if you are looking at using this for any kind of accreditation purposes, on the screen are the standards you can use. So just before we kick off, I just wanted to reiterate some points from the last session. We need to make sure that just like any other text, we are using digital games in an effective, engaging and an enriching way. Just like we wouldn't put on a video that does not contribute to student learning, we would not do the same with a digital game. We also want to use that digital game as something that is part of the story. It is something that helps us to teach the content. It is not the sole focus. The only caveat for that is, of course, if it is English, and then you can use it as a text analysis. We also need to ensure, just again, like with any other text, that there are those specific connections to curriculum. And today is where I'm going to show you how I've done that with a game called Kamada. As well as this, it is also important that we can demonstrate the connections that the game might have to any of ACARA's cross-curriculum priorities or the general capabilities. As I outlined last week, we need to make sure that there are thoughtfully designed pre- and post-lesson activities and activities for the students to do while they are playing the game, whether that be a gameplay log, whether that be taking screenshots, whether that be drawing what is happening on their screen. You can use games as a summative assessment, but their beauty lies in their ability to be a formative assessment as well. So, I get asked a lot of the time, how do I even begin to do this? Do I find a game first? Do I look at the curriculum first? I stress look at your technology first because across all the research I have done and the research that has come out, technology is unfortunately the biggest barrier to using digital games in our classroom. And what I do stress is that you need to be realistic about the access to devices that you have and your students will also have. Depending on your school, will determine the level of access. There are 3 different ways students can access devices while at school. First of all, a school may be BYOD specific. So a school, this is a high school in particular, might say you need to use a Chromebook. This is where you purchase them from. There may then be schools that say you can bring in whatever technology you can. As you can see that there are benefits to both of these, such as if they're bringing any device that is able to be a lot more cost effective for families, it means that it would suit the needs of the student and the families. However, it will also leave the teacher wondering what kind of devices, what apps, what programs can and what cannot run. When it is BYOD specific, it can, of course, have those cost factors which go against the family, but it does help the teachers understand what can be used. We then have our final option, and this is what would normally happen in primary schools as well. The school will provide access to technology. Going are the days of computer rooms. We know that with an increase in student numbers, we are seeing computer rooms slowly disappear. And that's understandable as well, because we know that the personal computers can be quite old. They need to be updated regularly. We also then have, whether it's a computer room or we have laptops, depending on the school, they may be readily available. So it could be that they can be booked for the next day, but then we also have those schools where you might need to book well in advance. And if by chance you were wanting to implement a game during times like NAPLAN, because NAPLAN is now online, that can cause issues as well. If primary schools tend to use a lot of tablets, which is great, it means they're a lot more hands-on, they're easy to navigate, but again, it might also limit the type of technology that you can or cannot access. So before anything else, do have a good understanding of the type of technology that your students will have access to. As I mentioned before, there are some benefits and considerations, but what I really wanted to talk about as well was the best type of game. And we're going to look at the best type of games as well later on in this webinar. So BYOD specific, the teacher knows the capabilities. They know that it's accessible and that it can access the internet. That means that things like web-based games are the best option. This means that the student should be able to log on to their device. They can log on to a site like Itch, which I will show you shortly, and it means they should be able to run it without too much problems. The other alternative is that a teacher can bring in a console. Now, I'll be talking about the different types of consoles shortly, but a lot of the time in my research, this has been teachers having to bring in their own consoles, which there could be issues around insurance, there could be issues around limitations. So I know that most teachers don't own 5 or 6 PlayStations. They might only have one, the same with a Switch. So consoles, yes, can be great depending on how you're choosing to play. Again, with the BYOD Any, the student in theory should have access to the internet. That is normally part of the provision that a device should have if they're bringing into the school. However, if you are looking for students to download something through platforms like Steam, this can be quite problematic because the students may not be able to do that. They might not have the administration authority to do that. They also might not have the room to download and to run not only the platform but the game itself. So again, BYOD Any, web-based and console. When you have school provided devices, this does give you a lot more options in terms of platforms and games. If you do still have a computer lab with computers that are able to run um, in-depth games and rather large games, then this is quite beneficial. You can get those downloaded beforehand, and if your school has a TSO or a technology student officer, they can actually help you to do that. So they can download them either via the Steam platform or again do it web-based via Itch. Even if you do have school provided devices, you might still choose to use a console, but the school provided devices can give you some more options if you were looking to have those games that have to be downloaded to be played. So here are some examples of games that you would use depending on the type of technology you have. So if you have a console, you could play as a whole class or as groups, and you could have it as a rotating jigsaw activity, for example. Assassin's Creed for our secondary teachers, we know that they have the discovery tours in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. And when you explore the life of an ancient Greek, that literally ticks all those parts of the syllabus. For primary teachers, there's a game called Fogs, which is a 2-player game where they have to work together to actually beat these puzzles. And that could actually work really well playing in a console situation where you project it onto the screen, and then you get the partners to keep swapping around so that they all have the chance. You do also have the option then of handheld devices. So these can be tablets, these can be a Nintendo Switch, or something called a Steam Deck. So I'm going to talk to you later about what Steam platform is. So a Steam Deck is a handheld version that allows you to download those games onto a handheld device, which can then be connected to a projector. When you are doing something like this, you can do it in small groups and pairs, or again, if you wanted to just do it as a whole class, you can connect that to the projector. Mario Maker is a game that is used in a number of different schools because it allows students to build their own levels. So there's a lot of challenges and narrative elements to that. And then the game that I showed you last week, for example, which was Deja, they would also allow students to work well in pairs or in a whole group. For our web-based games and even our downloadable games, students can work individually, in pairs, and in small groups. So Peggy's Post, which we looked at, that is an example where students can work really, really well in pairs, or Five Nights at Freddy's, they can certainly use that individually. I wanted to show you this website here. It is itch.io. Now, this is, I know, definitely in New South Wales. It is blocked by the department. In saying that, there are ways you can apply to get very specific websites unblocked. And when you would approach your TSO with the application to have it unblocked, you wouldn't have just that plain website there. You wouldn't just have itch.io. You would have the very specific game. So it'd be itch.io/Peggy's Post. That way, it would ensure that students could not access any of the other games. This is how you do access those free games, though, and this is one of the easiest ways to get games into your classrooms. So you would go to that website, you would click Browse, which is at the top there. You would then search for free games. This means that there is no need to input in. You do not need to put in credit card details or any school details or anything like that. And then you scroll down and you find the type and you choose HTML5. What this means, it means it is a web-based browser. You can then search by tag. If you are wanting to teach English, you could search for narrative. You can just search under educational and a range of games would come up. You can search for science. You could search for geography. There is countless, and when I say countless, there's thousands of categories for you to have a look through. You can get lost in holes, spending days having a look. And this is also one of those sites that you'd want to check back regularly. You also have the opportunity, if you choose to create your own free account, that you can actually keep a library list of the games that you want to look at. So this is one way of accessing web-based games that are free and that can be accessed by students no matter what the technology allows, as long as you do get that site unlocked. Here are some examples of games that I did find just really, really quickly. I think I went through But You Seem Fine last week, and that is absolutely a great game for English, but then also, again, PDHPE. We've got commerce, legal studies, geography has some amazing games. Fossil Quest is a game that can be used either in early secondary science or later primary science. There's a whole heap of language games available. We've got a beautiful game called Goodbye Doggy, which is about grieving processes, and you actually act as the dog, or the dog's ghost, and have a look around. There is, when we look at art, there is something called Chalk Gardens. So these are some of the games that are certainly worth having a look at. And like I said, you go back to them a number of different times, this Itch website, to have a look, because they are constantly updating these games. The other platform you can use online is something called Steam. Now, the majority of games on Steam do require payment. However, a lot of games will often offer the demo for free. A number of games I have looked at, including Schrodinger's Cat Burglar, you can play for free for the demo. And the demo actually gives you maybe 20 to 30 minutes of gameplay, which sometimes is the perfect amount, especially if you are doing those pre, during, and post activities. You can, again, search by free, you can search by demo, and again by educational. Now, that Schrodinger's cat burglar, that is one that I looked at for physics for year 11 and 12. I probably wouldn't look at it for primary, but having a look at Steam is definitely one of those platforms that can provide you a range of games, and again, something that you should really be exploring whenever you get the chance. There are other places that you can find games as well. So if you have a console or if you've got access to a console, we know that Xbox has a range of games. They also, if you are a subscriber, will often give you access to games each month for free. The same with PlayStation. So that game Fogs that came up before, the primary school game that would be great for PDHPE, that was actually a free game for a while on PlayStation. And myself and my 20-year-old son had fun playtesting that to write out some lesson plans. We also know that there are several games for Switch and Nintendo. That Mario Maker, for example, was one of those. And again, Steam and that Steam Deck. So how do you start? That very first thing, like I stressed, is about understanding your game technology, understanding what students can access, what they can't access, and how long you have access to that technology for. Once you have identified your game technology, you are then going to think about the different play styles. Do I need them to play as a whole class? Because then that will determine the type of game and the activities. You then start looking for some of those games. You have a look for them through any of those sites, depending on your tech style. Play the games if you can, because just like with a movie, you wouldn't just find a random movie, hit play and put that on and hope for the best. With a game, you need to have that playthrough. If it is a trailer, if it is a demo, that's great, because then that means you can do that really quick playthrough to have that understanding. I also suggest looking at trailers for the games and also gameplay of the games. This is what we like to call a paratext, so a text that can actually support the use of a game, that provides more information about it and how it might provide those further connections to the syllabus. Once you play the game, or as you play the game, take notes, take copious notes. As you play, think about those connections to the syllabus, those cross-curriculum priorities, and also those general capabilities. Think about the type of activities that you might get your students to use while they're playing. Think about the language choices of the game, some of the symbols, the imagery that is used throughout the game, even the game mechanics. So those are a range of things that you should be thinking of while we are playing that game. Last step is to think about that learning sequence. Think about that pre-lesson, think about the during, and then think about those post activities. Again, here is a link to the template for planning your lesson sequences. And this isn't something that you need to use every single time. This is something that I suggest that teachers use to start. If they've never used a game beforehand, within it are a whole heap of prompts to get you thinking about all the different considerations of using digital games in your lesson sequences and scope and sequences. Now, it also is beneficial to use one of these if you have a head teacher or a year level advisor that you might need to talk to about using the game beforehand, and this would provide them a thorough understanding of why you'd want to use it. You might also want to use this if you do have to apply to get a website unblocked, because this could accompany it and it has those clear syllabus links. So this is step one of that document. So step one is thinking about those technology requirements. Is it a laptop? Is it a switch? Is it a desktop computer? We know that students are unable to have their phones at school anymore. This has unfortunately reduced the amount of games that have been able to be used, but we also know that there are some schools that do provide phones for students to use in these kind of situations. Will it be VR or AR? And if you are looking at a VR game, you have to also think about the headsets, the accessibility, so those who have vision impairments. Once you have found that technology requirement and you've found your game, this is where you move down to step 3, which is that real critical analysis of the game. And in particular, I want you to look at that first one and the second one. So content accuracy. How much of a connection does it make to the syllabus? Is it a bit of a loose connection? And so therefore you need to actually reconsider the game, or can you see those clear connections and it's either teaching your students skills or content? That second one there is really important as well, something which I haven't seen in any of the other scaffolds that are supporting teachers using digital games, but cultural appropriateness. As Christine mentioned at the start, I have done my Masters of Research focused on looking at teachers using games like Civilization, Age of Empires in their history classrooms. While it does provide some excellent context and knowledge around why they did colonize these areas, we know that it is a requirement of the cross-curriculum priorities that we look at Indigenous histories, cultures, and knowledges. Within the new history syllabus as well, we know we also have to look at a variety of perspectives. So if you are using a game that focuses heavily on a culturally sensitive topic, you really need to consider, is it culturally appropriate? Were Indigenous people part of the group that actually put together the game? So, for example, a game called Never Alone, which is on console, it's not very expensive at all, but I think it's $25 on the PlayStation Store, but it is this game that was designed by and for the Cook Inlet Indigenous community in Alaska, where its purpose was to teach people about Inuit culture. And within the game, it also provided lots of video clips about the culture. So do make sure that any games that, even about the LGBT community, do make sure that there were people either working on the game or were consulted. Thinking about accessibility, are there students who have disabilities? Can they hold controllers? Can they use a laptop? Do they have vision impairments, whether that's color blindness? Do they have audio requirements? So I now have a case study for you. This is a game called Kamada. It is available via Steam at the moment for free because it is a demo. And the demo play itself is about 30 or 40 minutes. So it is a perfect length of time for both primary teachers and also secondary teachers. I say primary teachers first because the beautiful part of using digital games in a primary school is how you can use its cross KLA and you can bring in a number of syllabus outcomes. Where if those who do teach in secondary, they have to be focused on one learning area. Kamada is actually also available for play at the moment at ACME, and it is there until June. So if you happen to be in the area, you can go and check that out. So this is a game that a colleague of mine is working on. She has created a game because she never saw herself represented in the games that she was playing when she was growing up. I had to work out my technology first. So I thought, okay, I can use a Steam Deck to play this with the class and I can project it onto the screen. And I also know that the laptops that are available for students to use are at the school and they can actually download Steam, and they downloaded this game for students to play. When I looked online, this one is a free one and it's about sustainability. So this now crosses off our sustainability cross-curriculum priority. I played the game and I got to understand that there is clear connections to both geography and English content and outcomes. I looked at the syllabus where I was able to make those real clear and explicit connections to the outcomes, and I was able to provide that to the people around me who would be using this game. What's also required is to have a look at the scope and sequence of your work and find out where it would fit in. So if I couldn't work it out or get it in this year, I could potentially get students to use it next year and design the learning sequence around that. So I designed a series of lessons for my friend Nima, who created this game, because part of her study is to actually bring digital games into Ugandan classrooms. And so I came up with an idea for the students to actually have an understanding as to where the location is. So Uganda is obviously um, not on the Swahili coast. So I thought it was really important that the students get an understanding of where that is geographically. So that's before the gameplay. And also talking to the students about if they have been there, have they seen the coast before? Because the premise of this game is around sustainability, rubbish collection, recycling. During the gameplay, I got students to play in pairs and complete a gameplay log as they went. And I looked at literacy, numeracy, and also some cultural information for them to collect. After the gameplay, I then got students to create an artifact to demonstrate their learning. Now, I had to have a number of different options for the students because the teachers and the groups that Nima was working with in Uganda may have had limited access to technology, and the different schools may have had different access. So this was their gameplay log. I asked them as they were playing to actually create a map and to indicate the specific areas, and of course to identify a key. I got them to describe the environment. What does the beach look like? I was also using those higher order verbs. So identify. This is for 10 to 12-year-olds. And then I've asked them to explain. So that increase of verbs as they went through. So this worksheet was created for students to use as they progressed through the game. Again, which is why it's important for you to make those notes as you go through so you don't have to keep going back to the game. So this was the after gameplay. I gave them a variety of options about being able to demonstrate the knowledge that they had learnt, so they could make a poster, write a letter, create a comic strip, develop a short play, create a storyboard. And I scaffolded all of those activities for the teachers. This is where I aligned the outcomes. So the outcomes that I found in Uganda, there was multiple. So the game was actually able to provide several cross-curricular connections, especially because it was a primary school that she was taking the game to. It meant that she could connect it to a number of KLAs. Not only that, but there was a theme of environment and weather within the country. However, moving this over to Australia and connecting it to the Australian curriculum, we could look at stage 4. So the importance of environments, sustainable use and management, and then describing the text of structures. So not just English, but HAS as well. So if I was in Australia, I would be filling this out. I would have this as one or two lessons over 1 week. And the gaming affordances is around the movement and the choices that students could make. Step 3 of that template actually asks you to think about the students in your class. So when I was thinking about the students that would be playing this in Uganda, I was thinking about what Nima had told me about the students and the technology. So there was going to be a projector and there was laptops. She had told me that there was going to be 1 laptop between 2 students, which worked well because I wanted them to work in pairs. Their gaming experience, obviously, I had no idea and she had no idea either. She was going to a number of schools and there would be a variety of access to games and students with experience. So we had to plan for students of a variety of experience levels. You also really need to think about your ELAD students and those with additional learning needs. Glossaries were important because there were some terms in there that would be specific to sustainability. For those who had vision impairments, the projection onto a large screen was beneficial, and pairing them up worked for those who were maybe lower ability. You might pair them with a higher ability student to support. So there were several differentiating strategies that I used. So the creation of scaffolds, that peer support, and even Nima could work one-on-one with some of those teachers and those students as well. Modeling how to play the game is important as well, and that was the benefit of having the Steam Deck connected to the projector to show students how to start the game and the gameplay. Now, something I do want you to consider when you are thinking about gameplay. I do like to refer to Bloom taxonomy with this, because when we play games like Blooket and Kahoot, which I've discovered are the most frequently used digital games, because they're easy to use, all the kids love them, but it actually only prompts that understand and remember level. What we do need to do, and we can absolutely do this through careful planning, is get them to use those higher order thinking skills. So the creation and the evaluation. And this is absolutely achievable through the consideration of the pre, during, and post scaffolded gameplay. This last step is about those pedagogical strategies. So it was a unit on sustainability, and this is where Nima came in, and she was able to then expand their knowledge and understanding and showed them the map of the Swahili coast on Google Earth, and a clip as well, looking at pollution levels. You do need to consider your time management strategy. So one lesson to play, another lesson to produce the artifact, or maybe two, depending on the type of artifact they were creating, grouped in pairs, and students were to be completing that gameplay log. Now, I strongly suggest always having a gameplay log, because that enables students to collect that data as they play, and it also makes them consider those different elements that you want them to, as opposed to just mindless gameplay. The formative assessment strategy was going to be through the worksheet and the group discussions, and the teacher being involved with that. Those post-game activities was one of those 5 options that the students could engage in, and it's also a formative assessment. I've also got down the bottom there some additional considerations you might want to think about. So if you do use desktops where you've downloaded Steam or you've downloaded a game, who can you contact if there is an issue during gameplay? Is there an alternative backup? So if you can't get hold of one particular game, is there a similar type of game you can play? Or could you potentially use a gameplay clip? If you are in a school that does require you to communicate with your parents about the types of text you use, then you might want to consider having a note go out to parents about the game. And also, it's really important to take into consideration the gameplay ratings. Sometimes you might need to identify if professional learning needs to be undertaken in terms of how to use the game or how to access the technology.
So thank you everyone, and thank you especially Shay for sharing all these wonderful insights with us.